The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was sitting in my old recliner, the one Sarah used to tease me about keeping for 30 years. When my son David's name lit up the screen, for a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe he was calling to talk about Easter plans, or to ask if I wanted to come over for dinner this weekend like we used to do. "Hey Dad." His voice was flat, distant, not the warm tone I remembered from when he was younger, when he'd call just to chat about his day or ask for advice about work. "David, good to hear from you, son. How are Emma and the kids?" There was a pause, a long one, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. "Look, Dad, I need to tell you something about Easter. We're not going to be able to host this year. Actually, we think it's better if you make other plans." The words hit me like a physical blow. I could hear the television in the background at his house, my house, technically, though I'd never thrown that in his face. I could hear little Tommy laughing at something, probably a cartoon, the sounds of the family I'd helped build, the family I'd sacrificed everything for, carrying on without me. Other plans. I managed to ask, "David, what do you mean? We always spend Easter together. It's tradition, Dad. Emma and I have been talking, and we think we need some space. As a family unit, you understand, right?" No, I didn't understand. I didn't understand how the son I'd raised, the man whose mortgage I'd been paying for 3 years, the father whose children called me grandpa with squeals of delight, could suddenly decide I wasn't welcome at the dinner table I'd helped put food on. "Space," I repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "Have I done something wrong, son? If I've overstepped somehow, it's not about that." He cut me off, but his voice carried that impatient edge I'd been hearing more and more lately. "It's just, we need to establish boundaries. Emma thinks it's important for us to function as an independent family. Emma thinks." Those 2 words carried more weight than David probably realized. Emma, who'd never worked a day since they got married. Emma, who drove the car I'd co-signed for. Emma, who lived in the house I still owned, ate food bought with money that partially came from my monthly contributions to their emergency fund. "David, we're family. We don't need boundaries between us. We need Dad. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. We've made our decision." The line went quiet except for that distant sound of domestic life continuing without me. I could picture the scene, David standing in the kitchen I'd helped renovate last summer, probably looking out at the backyard where I'd installed that swing set for the kids. The swing set they'd begged me to put up, the one I'd spent 2 full weekends assembling while David was too busy with work to help. "So that's it?" I asked quietly. "No Easter dinner, no family time, just other plans. It's for the best. Dad, you'll see." The dial tone that followed was the loneliest sound I'd heard since Sarah's funeral 5 years ago. I sat there in that recliner, phone still pressed to my ear, wondering when exactly I'd become the problem that needed solving. When had my presence become a burden instead of a blessing? Outside, the March wind rattled the windows of my modest apartment, the place I'd moved to after selling the family home because David had said the house was too much for me to handle alone. The same house where I'd raised him, where I'd taught him to ride a bike and helped him with homework and watched him graduate high school. Too much for me, but apparently just right for him and his growing family. I looked around my small living room, at the photos lining the mantel, pictures of David's wedding, where I'd walked him down the aisle because his mother couldn't be there, pictures of Tommy's first birthday, little Lucy's christening, moments when I'd been essential, when my presence had mattered. Now I was being uninvited from Easter, cast out like some unwelcome stranger instead of the grandfather who'd held those children minutes after they were born, who'd paid for the hospital bills when David's insurance fell short. The worst part wasn't the rejection itself, it was the casual way he'd delivered it. Like he was canceling a dentist appointment instead of severing a family tradition that stretched back to his childhood. Like the decades of love and support I'd poured into his life meant nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, feeling something cold and hard settling in my chest. For years, I'd bent over backward to be the father David needed, the grandfather his children deserved. I'd swallowed my pride, opened my wallet, and smiled through every slight and dismissal. But this felt different. This felt like the final straw in a haystack of disrespect I'd been carrying for too long. Maybe it was time David learned what independence really looked like. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at shadows on the ceiling, my mind wandering back through the years like a film reel I couldn't shut off. Every sacrifice, every moment I'd put David's needs before my own, came flooding back with crystal clarity. I remembered the night he called me from college, sobbing into the phone about failing his economics midterm. "Dad, I might lose my scholarship." I don't know what to do. I've driven for hours through a snowstorm that same night, arriving at his dorm at 2 in the morning with homemade soup and the promise that we'd figure it out together. I'd spent my savings on a tutor, worked extra shifts at the plant to cover his living expenses when the scholarship money ran short. "You don't have to do this, Dad," he'd said then, but his eyes had been full of gratitude and relief. "That's what fathers do, son. We take care of our family." How naive those words seemed now, echoing in my empty apartment. Then there was the wedding. Sarah had been gone for 2 years by then, and David was all I had left. Emma was beautiful, sweet, everything I thought he deserved. But weddings are expensive, especially the kind Emma had dreamed of since childhood. The venue alone cost more than I made in 3 months, Dad. "We could always elope," David had suggested half-heartedly, but I could see the disappointment in Emma's face, the way her smile faltered. "Nonsense," I'd said, already calculating how much I could pull from my retirement fund. "Every girl deserves her dream wedding. Your mother would have wanted this." I'd walked Emma down the aisle too, since her own father had passed when she was young. The photographer captured that moment, me with tears in my eyes, placing her hand in David's, whispering a prayer that they'd be happy. That photo sat on their mantel now, in the house I'd helped them buy the house. God, the house. That was when the sacrifices really began piling up. They'd found it 3 years ago, a beautiful colonial in the suburbs with a big backyard and good schools nearby. Perfect for starting a family, they'd said. But David's credit wasn't quite good enough. His job history still too short for the bank's liking. I could co-sign. I'd offered over dinner at their cramped apartment, help with the down payment too, if you need it. Emma's face had lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? Oh, Mr. Henderson, that would be amazing." "Call me Dad," I'd said, squeezing her hand. "We're family now." So I'd put my name on that mortgage, 20% down from my retirement savings, plus closing costs, plus the immediate emergency expenses that seemed to crop up monthly. The water heater died in the first winter. The roof needed repairs after a bad storm. The kitchen appliances Emma had fallen in love with turned out to be lemons. Every time I'd gotten the call, every time I'd written the check, "We'll pay you back, Dad, I promise," David would say. But somehow, there was always another emergency, another unexpected expense, another reason why this month wasn't quite right for starting those repayments. I didn't mind. Not at first. When Tommy was born, I was the first person David called from the hospital. "Dad, he's perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and he's got your nose." I'd driven there so fast I probably broke 6 traffic laws, my heart bursting with pride and joy. For 2 years I was Grandpa, the guy who showed up every Sunday with groceries and stories, the one who babysat when David and Emma needed date nights, the one who installed the car seats, assembled the cribs, painted the nursery walls. When Lucy came along, I was ready. Had the college funds set up before she was even born, made sure Emma had everything she needed during those difficult months of bed rest, paying for the meal delivery service, the cleaning lady, whatever would make things easier for my growing family. My family. That's how I'd thought of them. Not just David, but Emma and the kids too. Sarah and I had always dreamed of grandchildren, of Sunday dinners and birthday parties and Christmas mornings filled with laughter. After she died, David's family became my reason for getting up each morning. I'd sold the house Sarah and I had shared for 30 years, downsizing to this modest apartment so I could free up equity for David's needs. "You don't need all that space anymore, Dad," he'd said, and he was right. But what he didn't say, what maybe I should have realized, was that he also didn't need me taking up space in his life. The signs had been there for months. If I was honest with myself, the gradually shortened visits, the way Emma would check her phone constantly when I was there, like she was counting the minutes until I left, the increasing frequency of plans that didn't include me, family outings I'd hear about secondhand through casual mentions. "Oh, we took the kids to the zoo last weekend," Emma would say, posting photos on social media that I'd discovered days later. Such a perfect family day. Without family, I'd convinced myself it was normal, healthy even. Young families needed their independence. I was just being oversensitive, reading too much into every small slight. But lying there in the dark, replaying David's cold dismissal, I couldn't deny the pattern anymore. The calls had become fewer and more transactional. Less "How are you doing, Dad?" and more "Hey." The property tax bill came in higher than expected. Less "Want to come over for dinner?" and more "Can you watch the kids so we can go out?" I'd become a service provider instead of a father, a bank instead of a grandfather, useful when needed, ignorable when not. The cruelest irony was that my sacrifices had worked exactly as intended. David's family was thriving. His credit was perfect now, his job secure, his children healthy and happy. He had everything I'd worked to give him: financial stability, a beautiful home, a bright future. Everything except gratitude. Everything except respect for the man who'd made it all possible. As the first light of dawn crept through my bedroom blinds, I made myself a promise. I was done being taken for granted. Done being treated like an inconvenience by the son I'd moved mountains for. If David wanted independence so badly, it was time he learned what that really meant. Part 3. The cold Easter Sunday arrived, grey and drizzling. The kind of weather that matches your mood when you're spending the holiday alone for the first time in decades. I woke up late. No reason to hurry when there's nowhere to be. No family waiting for you to arrive with the traditional ham and sweet potatoes I'd been bringing for years. The silence in my apartment felt different that morning. Heavier, more permanent. Usually, I'd be up before dawn, checking the ham, making sure the sides were perfect, ironing my good shirt for church and dinner. Instead, I found myself staring at the coffee maker, unsure of what to do with the empty hours stretching ahead. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, quiet as a grave. No calls from David, checking if I needed directions to a new restaurant they'd picked. No texts from Emma asking me to grab milk on the way over. No excited chatter from the kids asking when Grandpa was coming. Just silence. I made coffee and sat at my small dining table, looking out at the parking lot where other families were loading into cars, dressed in their Easter best. A young father was buckling his toddler into a car seat, the little girl squealing with delight at her frilly dress. The mother was laughing, taking pictures, clearly documenting their first Easter as a complete family. I remembered those days with David, the way he'd bounce with excitement in his little suit, clutching the Easter basket I'd filled with chocolates and small toys. The way Sarah would fuss over his hair, making sure every cowlick was smoothed down for the church photos. The way he'd insist on hunting for eggs before breakfast, even though we'd hidden them in the same spots every year. "Dad, look, I found the golden egg," he'd shout, holding up the plastic prize like it was a real treasure. And to him, it was. The golden egg always had a $5 bill inside, which felt like a fortune to a 6-year-old. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, some other father, some other family, some other life. Around noon, I decided to drive by the house. Not to stop, not to cause any drama, just to see, maybe catch a glimpse of my grandchildren playing in the yard, maybe remind myself of what I was missing, what I'd apparently sacrificed for the greater good of David's family unit. The house looked perfect from the street. The lawn I'd helped reseed last fall was green and lush. The flower beds Emma had wanted were blooming with tulips and daffodils. Cars filled the driveway more than usual. They were having a party. A celebration. An Easter celebration without me. I parked across the street, far enough away to avoid being noticed. Close enough to see into the backyard through the gaps in the fence I'd helped install. There were balloons tied to the deck railing, the bright pastels of Easter joy. I could hear laughter, children's voices, the unmistakable sound of a family gathering in full swing. Through the kitchen window, I caught glimpses of people moving around. Emma's parents had come in from Ohio, the same people who'd thanked me profusely at the wedding for giving their daughter such a beautiful ceremony. David's college friends were there too, the ones who'd always called me Mr. H and complimented me on raising such a great son. Everyone was there, everyone except the man whose name was still on the mortgage, whose money had made this house possible, whose sacrifices had created the very foundation this celebration was built on. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching my replacement family enjoy their holiday. The kids, my grandchildren, were running around the backyard in their Easter outfits, probably hunting for eggs hidden by someone else. Tommy was bigger than when I'd last seen him, which was only a month ago, but felt like a lifetime. Lucy was walking more confidently now, her little dress bouncing as she toddled after her brother. They looked happy, content, complete. They looked like they didn't need me at all. The hardest part was realizing. But maybe David was right. Maybe they didn't need me. I'd done my job too well, given them everything they required to build a life without their benefactor. I'd made myself obsolete through my own generosity. A tap on my passenger window made me jump. An elderly woman from the neighborhood was peering at me with concern, probably wondering why some old man was sitting alone in a car on Easter Sunday. "You okay, dear?" she asked when I rolled down the window. "Just fine," I managed. Just ... remembering. She looked toward David's house, then back at me with the knowing expression of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize heartbreak when she saw it. "Sometimes the hardest part of raising children is letting them go," she said gently. even when they're not ready to fly on their own. After she walked away, I started the car and drove home, her words echoing in my head. Let them go. That's what David thought he was doing, establishing independence, creating boundaries, proving he could provide for his family without dear old dad's help. But independence isn't just about emotional boundaries, it's about financial responsibility. It's about standing on your own 2 feet, not just pushing away the people who've been holding you up. I spent the rest of Easter Sunday in my apartment, ordering Chinese takeout and thinking about what independence really meant. By the time the sun set, painting my small living room in shades of orange and red, I'd made a decision. If David wanted to function as an independent family, if he wanted to establish boundaries and create distance, then it was time for him to learn about another kind of boundary, the kind that comes with mortgage papers and property taxes and all the other responsibilities of actual home ownership. For 3 years, I'd protected him from those realities. I'd handled the paperwork, managed the financial details, kept his name off the harder aspects of home ownership while letting him enjoy all the benefits. But protection was just another word for dependence, wasn't it? And David had made it very clear that dependence was no longer welcome in his independent family unit. As I got ready for bed that night, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not the accommodating father, not the generous grandfather, not the man who said yes to every request and absorbed every slight with a smile. I saw someone who was tired of being taken for granted, someone who was ready to teach a very important lesson about the difference between independence and ingratitude. Tomorrow, I decided, would be the first day of David's real education in what it meant to stand on his own. The revelation came 3 days after Easter, during what should have been a routine trip to the grocery store. I was standing in the checkout line, idly scrolling through social media on my phone while waiting to pay for my modest cart of food, when I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. It was a post from Emma's sister, tagged with several of David's co-workers and friends, a group photo from Easter dinner. Everyone gathered around my dining room table, the one I'd bought and had delivered to the house last Christmas because Emma had mentioned wanting something more suitable for entertaining. But it wasn't the photo that stopped me in my tracks. It was the caption. So proud of my brother-in-law David for building this amazing life completely on his own. Self-made man with a beautiful family and gorgeous home. Proof that hard work and determination pay off. #blessed family, #American dream, #self-made, self-made. The words hit me like a physical slap. I stood there in that grocery line, other shoppers growing impatient behind me, reading and rereading those words. Self-made man, beautiful home, hard work and determination. Don't mention of the father who'd co-signed the mortgage. No acknowledgement of the down payment that had come from someone else's retirement fund. No recognition of the monthly emergency contributions that kept their budget afloat. Just David, the self-made success story, basking in praise for accomplishments that were built on my sacrifices. I barely remember paying for my groceries or driving home. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my apartment door, the full weight of the betrayal settling in. It wasn't just that David had uninvited me from Easter, it was that he'd been actively erasing me from his success story, taking credit for achievements that I'd made possible. Over the next few hours, I went down a rabbit hole I probably should have avoided. Social media posts, LinkedIn updates, casual mentions in family photos and celebrations. The pattern was consistent and devastating. 6 months ago, David had updated his LinkedIn profile with a post about achieving home ownership through hard work and financial discipline. The post had dozens of likes and congratulatory comments from colleagues and friends, all praising his independence and success. 8 months ago, there was a Facebook post from Emma about finally feeling like real adults now that we own our own home. The comments were full of heart emojis and admiration for their adulting skills. A year ago, David had shared an article about millennial home buying challenges with the caption, "Glad we managed to beat the odds and make it work. Sometimes you just have to sacrifice and save to get what you want." Sacrifice and save. The irony was so thick I could taste it, but the worst discovery came when I found a conversation thread in the comments of that Easter photo. One of David's college friends had commented, "Dude, I'm so jealous. I'm still stuck in my parents' basement while you're living the dream. Any advice for those of us still figuring it out?" David's response made my stomach turn. "Honestly, man, it's all about cutting ties with dependency and learning to stand on your own." Emma and I made a decision early on that we weren't going to be one of those couples that relies on family money or handouts. We wanted to build something that was completely ours. It's harder, but the independence is worth it. Independence, no family money, no handouts. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, feeling like I was reading about a stranger's life. In David's version of events, I didn't exist. My contributions had been erased, my sacrifices rewritten as his accomplishments, my generosity transformed into his independence. The comments that followed were even worse. Friends praising David's integrity for refusing family help, colleagues admiring his self-reliance and bootstrap mentality, Emma's friends gushing about how inspiring it was to see a young couple make it on their own in today's economy. Make it on their own, while living in a house I owned, driving cars I'd helped finance, raising children whose college funds I'd started and continued to contribute to monthly. I printed out screenshots of everything. Not because I planned to confront David, I was past the point of expecting apologies or acknowledgements, but because I needed proof that I wasn't imagining this, that the betrayal was as complete and calculated as it seemed. That evening, I called my lawyer, Jim Morrison. We'd gone to high school together, and he'd handled Sarah's will and a few other legal matters over the years. He was one of the few people who knew the full extent of my financial involvement in David's life. "Tom, good to hear from you," Jim said when his secretary put me through. "How's retirement treating you?" "It's been better," I admitted. "Jim, I need to ask you about some property issues. Hypothetical, maybe. Shoot. If someone co-signs on a mortgage and the property is in their name, but they've been letting someone else live there and claim ownership, what are the legal implications?" There was a pause. "Tom, are we talking about David's house?" "Hypothetically," Jim sighed. "Okay, hypothetically speaking, if you're the primary name on a mortgage and deed, you have full legal rights to that property. The people living there are essentially tenants, even if they're family members. You could change the terms of their residency, sell the property, or transfer certain responsibilities to them." "What kind of responsibilities?" "Well, property taxes, for one, maintenance costs, insurance responsibilities. Right now, if your name is on everything, you're liable for all of it. But you could legally shift that burden to the occupants if you wanted to." I felt something clicking into place, like tumblers in a lock. How would that work, exactly? There are several ways. You could formally charge rent, which would make them legal tenants with tax obligations. You could transfer the property tax responsibility to them directly, or he paused, and I could hear the slight smile in his voice. You could simply stop paying certain bills and let them figure out what independence really costs. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, looking out at the parking lot where that young family had loaded into their car on Easter morning. I thought about David's social media posts, his claims of self-made success, his casual erasure of everything I'd done to make his life possible. For 3 years, I'd been the invisible foundation holding up his house of cards. I'd absorbed the costs, handled the responsibilities, and managed the financial realities while he got to play the role of successful young father and homeowner. But foundations can shift, and sometimes, when they do, the structures built on top of them discover just how unstable they really were. David wanted independence. David wanted to cut ties with dependency and prove he could stand on his own. It was time to give him exactly what he'd asked for. The manila folder sat on my kitchen table like a sleeping beast, filled with 3 years' worth of documents that told the real story of David's self-made success. I'd spent most of Tuesday morning gathering everything from my filing cabinet: mortgage agreements, property deeds, tax documents, insurance policies, bank statements showing monthly transfers. The paper trail was damning in its completeness. Every single aspect of David's homeownership traced back to me. The initial mortgage application listed me as the primary borrower, with David as a secondary applicant who frankly hadn't qualified on his own. The down payment, $47,000, had come directly from my retirement account, documented in bank transfers I'd made without hesitation because I'd believed I was investing in my family's future. But it was the property deed that told the most important story. There, in black and white legal language, was the truth David had been hiding from his friends and social media followers. Thomas Henderson, that's me, was listed as the primary property owner. David's name appeared as a secondary resident, with rights of occupancy but not ownership. For 3 years, I'd been paying property taxes on a house where I wasn't welcome. I'd been covering insurance premiums for a family that had decided I was too much of a burden to invite for holidays. I'd been maintaining financial responsibility for people who claimed they'd built their success without any help. The irony was staggering. David's house, the symbol of his independence, The foundation of his self-made narrative legally belonged to the father he'd been pushing away. I spread the documents across my table and started making copies, organizing everything into a neat stack that would make the situation crystal clear to anyone who bothered to look. The numbers were stark and undeniable. Over 3 years, I'd contributed more than $89,000 to David's household, not counting the ongoing monthly support that I'd somehow convinced myself was just helping family. But the most telling document was the property tax bill that had arrived just yesterday, $4,200 for the year, automatically charged to my bank account as it had been since the house was purchased. David had never seen this bill, never had to budget for it, never even known when it was due. I'd handled it quietly, seamlessly, the way I'd handled all the invisible costs of his independence. That was about to change. I called Jim Morrison again that afternoon, this time ready to move beyond hypothetical questions. I want to transfer the property tax responsibility to David, I told him directly. What's the fastest way to make that happen? Well, there are a few approaches, Jim said, and I could hear papers rustling on his end. The cleanest way is to update the county records, to show him as the responsible party for taxes while maintaining your ownership rights. It's perfectly legal, happens all the time with rental properties and family situations. How long would that take? If we file the paperwork this week, it should be processed within 10 days. The next quarterly tax bill would go directly to him, and there's no way for him to refuse it or redirect it back to me. Jim chuckled. Not unless he wants to risk a tax lien on the property. Property taxes are non-negotiable, Tom. Someone has to pay them, and if you're transferring that responsibility to the resident, it becomes their legal obligation. What about the insurance and mortgage payments? Those are trickier because they involve third-party contracts, but the property taxes, those are between the resident and the county. Clean and simple. I made an appointment to see Jim the next morning. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of purpose, of forward momentum. This wasn't about revenge. Exactly. It was about consequences. It was about teaching David what independence actually looked like when you stripped away the financial safety net he'd been taking for granted. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I calculated exactly how much David's independence had cost me. The numbers were sobering. Beyond the initial down payment and ongoing property taxes, there had been $12,000 for the new roof after that storm, $3,500 for the kitchen appliances that broke in the first year, $8,200 for the furnace replacement, $2,800 for the deck repairs, $15,000 in various emergency loans that were never repaid, $18,000 in monthly contributions to their household budget. Total was staggering. Nearly $95,000 over 3 years, enough to buy a decent car, or take a luxury cruise around the world, or simply enjoy a comfortable retirement, without constantly worrying about someone else's financial emergencies. All of it given freely, happily even, because I'd believed I was supporting my son's success and my grandchildren's future. All of it now reframed as an impediment to David's independence, a dependency that needed to be severed for the good of his family unit. I looked at those numbers and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anger, not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, calculating variety that comes when you finally see clearly how you've been used. David wanted to be he wanted to prove he could handle home ownership without family interference. He wanted to establish boundaries and create distance from his overly involved father. Perfect. I was about to give him the opportunity to prove all of it. As I sealed the documents into an envelope for Jim Morrison, I thought about the young father I'd seen loading his family into the car on Easter morning. That man probably handled his own property taxes, managed his own emergencies, took responsibility for his own success and failures. He didn't have a father subsidizing his independence while being treated like an unwelcome intrusion. David was about to learn what that kind of real independence felt like, and I was about to discover what it meant to stop carrying the financial weight of a family that had decided they didn't need me. The manila folder went into my briefcase, ready for tomorrow's appointment. The first step toward teaching my son the most expensive lesson of his life. Jim Morrison's office hadn't changed much since I'd been there for Sarah's will 5 years ago. Same heavy wooden furniture, same law books lining the walls, same sense of serious business being conducted behind closed doors. But this time, I wasn't there to settle someone's affairs. I was there to unsettle them. Tom, you look determined, Jim said as his secretary closed the door behind me. I take it this isn't a hypothetical anymore. Not even close. I set my briefcase on his desk and pulled out the manila folder. I want to transfer full property tax responsibility to David, effective immediately. No advance notice, no gradual transition. Just make it his problem. Jim opened the folder and whistled low as he reviewed the documents. Tom, this is a significant financial obligation you've been carrying. $4,200 annually, plus all these other expenses. Are you sure you want to do this? Once we file the paperwork, there's no taking it back easily, I'm sure. I leaned back in the leather chair, feeling more certain than I had about anything in years. Jim, for 3 years I've been subsidizing David's independence while he tells everyone how self-made he is. I've been paying for his success while he treats me like an inconvenience. I'm done. What about your relationship with him? This is going to cause some ... friction. I thought about Easter Sunday, about that cold phone call, about all those social media posts claiming credit for achievements built on my sacrifices. The relationship is already damaged. Jim, maybe it's time David learned what it actually costs to maintain it. Jim nodded slowly, making notes on a legal pad. Okay, here's what we'll do. I'll file a property tax responsibility transfer with the county this afternoon. The paperwork will show David as the primary resident responsible for all property taxes going forward. The next quarterly bill, which should arrive in about 6 weeks, will go directly to him. What about the money that's already been automatically withdrawn from my account? We'll contact your bank and cancel the automatic payment authorization. Any future bills will be David's responsibility entirely, and he can't redirect this back to me, not without your written consent. Once the county has him listed as the responsible party, that's who they'll pursue for payment. If he doesn't pay, they'll place a lien on the property. The weight of that statement settled over me. A lien on the property I still technically owned, because of David's financial irresponsibility. It was a risk, but one I was willing to take. David was many things, but he wasn't stupid. When faced with the choice between paying his taxes or losing his house, he'd find the money. How much are we talking about, exactly? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The next quarterly bill will be $1,050. But Tom, there's something you should consider. David's never seen this expense before. He has no idea it's coming. $1,050 might not sound like much to you, but for a young family managing monthly expenses, he can handle it, I said firmly. He's been telling everyone how financially independent he is. Time to prove it. Jim spent the next hour walking me through the legal implications, making sure I understood exactly what I was doing. The property would remain in my name. I wasn't ready to give up that level of control yet, but all tax obligations would shift to David, along with the legal consequences if he failed to meet them. There's one more thing, Jim said as we finished up. Are you planning to tell David about this change beforehand? I considered the question. The decent thing would be to give him advance warning, explain the situation, maybe even offer to help him budget for this new expense. But decency was a two-way street, and David had abandoned his side of it when he uninvited me from Easter. No, I said finally. David values his independence. He can discover this the same way he's discovered everything else about homeownership, by handling it himself. Walking out of Jim's office, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because I was looking forward to David's shock and scrambling, though I'd be lying if I said that didn't provide some satisfaction, but because I was finally taking action instead of just absorbing endless disappointment and disrespect. For 3 years, I'd been the invisible partner in David's success story. I'd handled the difficult parts, managed the boring details, absorbed the costs, all while he got to play the role of successful young homeowner. He'd gotten all the benefits of my involvement with none of the acknowledgement or appreciation. That arrangement was ending today. I stopped at the bank on the way home, canceling the automatic payment that had been silently transferring $1,050 from my account to the county tax office every quarter. The banker asked if I wanted to set up a different payment method. No, I told her. That's someone else's responsibility now. Someone else's responsibility. The phrase felt foreign but liberating. For the first time in years, David's housing costs would be David's problem. His property taxes would come out of his budget, not mine. His financial planning would have to account for the real costs of homeownership, not just the easy parts. That evening, I sat in my apartment and imagined the scene that would unfold in about 6 weeks. David checking the mail, finding an official-looking envelope from the county tax assessor. The moment of confusion as he opened it, expecting some routine notice, only to discover a bill for over $1,000. The growing panic as he realized this wasn't a mistake, that someone actually expected him to pay this money he'd never budgeted for. Would he call Emma first, or would he try to figure it out himself? Would he immediately assume it was an error, Or would some part of him suspect that his free ride was finally coming to an end? Either way, he'd have to confront the reality that his independence had been built on someone else's financial foundation, and for the first time in 3 years, that someone else wouldn't be there to catch him when he stumbled, opened a beer and raised it in a silent toast to the empty apartment, to David's education in real independence, to the end of being taken for granted, and to the beginning of consequences. Part 7. The tax bill arrives. 6 weeks and 3 days later. My phone rang at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening. David's name on the caller ID sent a familiar jolt through my chest, but this time it carried anticipation instead of hope. I let it ring 4 times before answering, taking a slow sip of coffee while I waited. His voice was tight, confused, maybe even a little panicked. "Dad, I need to ask you about something." "Hello, David. How are Emma and the kids?" They're fine. Dad, did you get some kind of tax bill in the mail? From the county?" I set my coffee cup down carefully, making sure my voice stayed level. "No, son. I haven't received any county tax bills recently, because I got this bill today for $1,050, and it says it's for property taxes on our house. But that doesn't make sense, because we've never paid property taxes before. I mean, they must be automatically included in our mortgage payment, right?" The innocent confusion in his voice was almost endearing. 3 years of home ownership, and he'd never wondered why their mortgage payments seemed so much lower than their friends' payments. Never questioned why he'd never seen a property tax bill. Never thought to ask how these things actually worked. I said, as if I was pondering the situation for the first time. "That is strange. What exactly does the bill say?" "It says, let me read this. Property tax assessment for 428 Maple Street. Quarterly payment due within 30 days. And then it has my name on it, like I'm supposed to pay it. But Dad, this has to be a mistake, right? We don't owe property taxes. Someone else handles that." Someone else, even now, even faced with a bill bearing his name and address. David couldn't quite grasp that he might be responsible for the costs of his independence. "Well, son, property taxes are typically the responsibility of the property owner. Have you checked your mortgage documents to see what's included in your monthly payment?" "I know, I haven't looked at those in a while. Emma handles most of the financial paperwork." Of course she did. Emma, who'd been telling her family and friends about their financial independence while never bothering to understand where the money actually came from or went. "Maybe you should review those documents," I suggested gently. "See exactly what your mortgage covers and what additional expenses you might be responsible for." "But Dad, $1,050. That's a lot of money. We don't have that just sitting around. Our budget is pretty tight already." There it was. The first crack in the facade of financial independence. The first moment when David had to confront the gap between his self-made success story and the reality of his actual financial situation. "I understand that's a significant expense," I said. "Have you considered that this might be a quarterly bill? Property taxes are often paid 4 times a year." The silence that followed was so long I thought the call might have dropped. When David spoke again, his voice had changed. The confusion was hardening into something closer to panic. 4 times a year, Dad. That would be more than $4,000 annually. We can't afford that. We literally cannot afford that on top of everything else." "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said, and I meant it. David was smart, resourceful when he needed to be. He'd find the money, somehow. He'd adjust his budget, maybe pick up some freelance work, perhaps ask Emma to consider part-time employment. He'd do what millions of homeowners did every day, take responsibility for the costs of their independence. Dad. His voice shifted again, and I heard something I hadn't heard in years. Vulnerability. "Dad, would you be able to help with this? Just until we figure out what's going on." The request hung in the air between us like smoke. Help with this. Just until we figure out what's going on. As if the situation was some mysterious bureaucratic error rather than the natural consequence of actual property ownership. I thought about Easter Sunday. I thought about those social media posts claiming credit for self-made success. I thought about 3 years of invisible subsidies and casual dismissals and being treated like an inconvenience by the son whose house I'd bought. "David," I said carefully, "didn't you tell your friends that you and Emma built your success without any family money or handouts? That you wanted to stand on your own?" Another long silence. What do you mean?" "I saw some of your social media posts. About being self-made, about the importance of independence. It sounded like you and Emma were proud of handling everything yourselves." "Dad, that's not. I mean, yes, we want to be independent, but this is different. This is an emergency." Is it an emergency, or is it just a bill you weren't expecting? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What's the difference? Well, emergencies are unexpected crises. Bills are regular responsibilities of homeownership. If this is really a legitimate property tax bill, then it's not an emergency. It's just a cost you weren't aware of. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, could almost picture him standing in the kitchen I'd helped pay for, holding a bill that represented the first real test of his financial independence. Dad, I don't understand what's happening. We've never gotten a bill like this before. Why now? I don't know. Maybe you should call the county tax office and ask them to explain how property taxes work. They'll be able to tell you exactly what you're responsible for and when payments are due. But what am I supposed to do about this bill? The due date is in 3 weeks. What does any homeowner do when they get a property tax bill? You pay it. With what money? The question hung there, raw and desperate. With what money, indeed? The money he'd been spending on vacation photos and restaurant meals, and all the other expenses of a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. The money he'd never had to set aside for property taxes because someone else had been quietly handling that responsibility. David, I'm sure you and Emma can adjust your budget to accommodate this expense. Lots of young families manage property taxes as part of home ownership. But we didn't know. We didn't budget for this. Then maybe it's time to learn more about the real costs of owning a home. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of boundaries being respected. Not the boundaries David had tried to impose by uninviting me from family gatherings, but real boundaries, financial boundaries, the kind that separated what was his responsibility from what was mine. Tomorrow, David would start making phone calls. He'd contact the county, maybe review his mortgage documents, possibly even consult with a financial advisor about budgeting for property taxes. He'd begin the process of understanding what homeownership actually cost. When someone wasn't quietly subsidizing the difficult parts, it was going to be an expensive education. But then again, the most important lessons usually were. The second call came 3 days later. At 6:45 in the morning, I was barely awake, still in my robe and slippers, when David's number lit up my phone screen. This time, there was no confusion in his voice, only anger. Dad, I talked to the county tax office yesterday. I set my coffee mug down and settled into my kitchen chair. Oh, what did they tell you? They told me that the property taxes on our house have been transferred to my name as of 6 weeks ago. They said someone filed paperwork to make me the responsible party instead of you. The accusation hung heavy in his tone. I could picture him pacing in his kitchen, probably running his hands through his hair the way he'd done as a teenager when he was frustrated about something. I see, I said calmly. And what else did they tell you? They said you'd been paying the property taxes for 3 years. 3 years, Dad. Why didn't you ever tell me? You never asked. You were so proud of your independence. I assumed you were handling all aspects of home ownership yourself. That's not the point. The point is you transferred this responsibility to me without telling me, without any warning. Do you have any idea what this does to our budget? I took a sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. David, whose name is on the property deed, what does that have to do with anything? It's a simple question. Whose name is on the deed to the house you live in? Another pause, longer this time. Yours, he admitted quietly. But Dad, we've been living here for 3 years. This is our home. Yes, it's your home, and I'm glad you've been comfortable there. But it's my property, and I've been carrying all the financial responsibilities that come with ownership. The taxes, the insurance, the maintenance costs, all of it. So this is what? Some kind of punishment? Because we didn't invite you to Easter. The word punishment stung more than I expected. This isn't punishment, David, this is reality. You're a homeowner now, or at least, you're living as one. Homeowners pay property taxes. It's not optional, but we can't afford it. Emma's not working. We've got the kids. Our budget is already stretched thin. Then maybe it's time to make some adjustments. Get a second job. Have Emma consider part-time work. Cut some expenses. That's what responsible homeowners do when they're facing financial challenges. Dad, please. His voice cracked slightly, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to come to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings. I'm asking for your help. We need you. Those 3 words, we need you, hit harder than I'd anticipated. For months, David had been pushing me away, establishing boundaries, making it clear that my presence was more burden than blessing. Now, faced with a bill he couldn't pay, suddenly I was needed again. You need my money, I corrected gently. That's different than needing me. That's not fair, isn't it? David, when was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time I was invited to spend time with my grandchildren? When was the last time I felt like part of your family instead of just a bank you could call when things got tight? Silence. I've been supporting your household for 3 years, I continued. Not just the property taxes, but emergency repairs, unexpected expenses, monthly contributions to your budget. And in return, I've been gradually pushed further and further out of your life. Uninvited from holidays, excluded from family gatherings, treated like an inconvenience rather than a father and grandfather. Dad, that's not it, is exactly that. Son, you wanted independence. You wanted to function as a family unit without interference from me. You've got it. This property tax bill is what independence looks like. I could hear Emma in the background now, her voice sharp and worried. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Panic was setting in. Look, Dad, maybe we made some mistakes. Maybe we should have handled things differently. But this isn't the way to fix it. This is just ... It's cruel, cruel. The word sat heavy in my chest. Was it cruel to expect my adult son to pay for his own housing costs? Was it cruel to stop subsidizing a lifestyle he'd been taking credit for? Or was it cruel to spend 3 years being marginalized by the family I'd sacrificed everything to support? It was a small gesture, but meaningful. Thompson's Diner had been our Saturday morning tradition when David was in elementary school. Just father and son, sharing pancakes and conversation before heading home to help Sarah with yard work or household projects. The fact that he'd remembered, that he'd made the effort, suggested this conversation might be different from our recent interactions. We sat across from each other in my small living room, 2 cups of familiar coffee between us like a bridge across months of hurt and misunderstanding. Dad, I owe you an apology. A big one. I nodded but didn't respond immediately. I'd learned the value of silence, of letting important words settle before reacting. I've been thinking about this situation for weeks now, David continued. Not just the tax bill, but everything. The way I've treated you, the way I've taken your help for granted, the way I've been erasing you from our success story. He opened the folder he'd brought and pulled out several printed pages. I recognized them immediately, screenshots of his social media posts, the ones I'd discovered weeks ago, that had crystallized my understanding of how completely he'd rewritten our family's financial reality. I printed these out so I could see them clearly, really look at what I'd been saying. His voice was quiet, ashamed. Dad, reading these now, I sound like an ass. A complete ass who was taking credit for accomplishments that were built on your sacrifices. David, no, let me finish, please. I need to say this. I settled back in my chair, watching my son struggle with words that clearly didn't come easily. The property tax bill scared the hell out of me, not just because of the money, though $1,050 was more than we had available, but because it made me realize how much I didn't know about our own life, our own house, our own finances. He pulled out another sheet of paper, this one covered with handwritten numbers and calculations. I spent 3 days going through every document related to our house, the mortgage papers, the insurance policies, the maintenance records. Dad, you've contributed over $95,000 to our household in 3 years. $95,000, and I've been telling people we did it all ourselves. The number hung in the air between us. I'd calculated the same figure weeks ago, but hearing David say it aloud carried different weight. It meant he'd done the math, faced the reality, acknowledged the scope of my investment in his independence. I called Jim Morrison too, David continued. Asked him to explain the property ownership situation. Dad, I didn't know. I honestly didn't know that your name was still on everything, that you were still carrying all the legal and financial responsibility while I got to play house with your property. Son, I never meant for you to feel deceived, but I was deceiving everyone else, wasn't I? Including myself. Emma and I have been living this fantasy where we were successful young homeowners who'd made it on our own. Meanwhile, you were quietly handling all the hard parts, all the expensive parts, all the parts that would have made our independence impossible. David leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. The last 2 weeks have been the hardest of our marriage, not just because of the money stress, but because Emma and I had to confront how artificial our comfortable life really was. We've been living beyond our means for years, subsidized by your generosity and protected from consequences by your safety net. And now we're learning what our actual means are. Emma found a part-time job at the elementary school. I've taken on freelance work that I'd been turning down because I thought we didn't need the extra income. We've cut our budget by almost $800 a month, eliminating expenses we thought were necessities but turned out to be luxuries we couldn't really afford. He showed me another sheet of paper, a detailed household budget that looked nothing like the casual financial management they'd practiced before. "We can handle the property taxes going forward," he said. "It'll be tight, but we can do it. More importantly, we want to do it. We want to actually earn the independence we've been claiming to have." I studied my son's face, seeing something I hadn't seen in years. Not just maturity, but humility. The kind that comes from facing hard truths about yourself and deciding to change rather than make excuses. "David, I need you to understand something. The property taxes weren't punishment for Easter dinner. They were a consequence of you wanting independence while still depending on my support. I couldn't keep subsidizing a life where I wasn't welcome. I know that now. And Dad, about Easter ... He paused, seeming to gather himself. That was Emma's sister's influence more than our own thinking. She'd been telling Emma that we needed to establish boundaries with family, that too much involvement from parents was unhealthy for marriages, and you agreed with her. I thought I did. I thought setting boundaries meant pushing you away. I didn't understand the difference between healthy independence and hurtful exclusion. David reached into his folder one more time and pulled out what looked like a greeting card. "The kids made this for you," he said, handing it over. "They've been asking about Grandpa Tom constantly. They don't understand why you haven't been coming over, why you weren't at Easter, why their bedtime story reader disappeared." I opened the card with trembling hands. It was construction paper covered with crayon drawings, stick figures labeled Grandpa, Tommy, and Lucy playing in what appeared to be a backyard. Lucy's contribution was mostly scribbles, but Tommy had written "We miss you" in careful kindergarten letters. The simple honesty of it broke something loose in my chest that I'd been holding tight for months. "David, I miss them too. I miss all of you. But I couldn't keep being treated like a convenience rather than family. You're not a convenience, Dad. You're the reason we have any of this. The house, the stability, the opportunities we've been able to give the kids." Emma and I talked about this for hours. Without your support, we'd probably still be in that cramped apartment, struggling to save for a down payment, worrying about every unexpected expense. And that would have been okay too. Many young families start that way. But we didn't have to, because you gave us a different start, a better start. And instead of being grateful, instead of acknowledging what you've done for us, we got comfortable and entitled and started believing our own story about self-made success. David set down his coffee cup and looked directly at me for the first time since arriving. "Dad, I'm asking for another chance. Not for more money, not for more help with bills. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild our relationship on honest ground, where I acknowledge what you've contributed, where I treat you like the father and grandfather you are, where I earn your respect instead of just expecting it." I studied my son's face, seeing echoes of the little boy who used to come to me with problems and trust that Dad could fix anything. But this wasn't a little boy asking for help anymore. This was a man taking responsibility for his mistakes and asking for forgiveness. "What does that look like practically?" I asked. "It looks like Sunday dinners where you're always welcome. It looks like me calling you to talk, not just when I need something. It looks like the kids having their grandfather in their lives regularly, not just during emergencies." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "And it looks like us paying our own property taxes while still making room for your involvement in our family." I thought about the past few months, the hurt, the anger, the satisfaction of teaching David an expensive lesson. I thought about Easter Sunday spent alone, about watching my grandchildren play in a backyard where I was no longer welcome, but I also thought about the man sitting across from me now, humbled and honest, asking for another chance to get it right. "Sunday dinners sound good," I said finally. "But I have one condition." David nodded eagerly. "Anything. No more social media posts about being If you're going to share your success story, share the whole story, including the parts where family helped make it possible." For the first time in our conversation, David smiled. Really smiled. "Deal, Dad. Though I should warn you, my next post is going to be pretty embarrassing for me. Something about learning humility from property tax bills and rediscovering what family really means." I smiled back, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Your grandmother Sarah used to say that the most important lessons are usually the most expensive ones. Sounds like you paid full price for this education." "Worth every penny," David said, "even if it took me longer than it should have to appreciate what I was learning." That afternoon, I drove to David's house for the first time in months, not to sneak a glimpse from across the street, but to have dinner with my family. Tommy launched himself at me the moment I walked through the door, chattering excitedly about school and friends and everything I'd missed. Luce, now walking confidently, toddled over with arms raised, demanding to be picked up by Grandpa Tom. Emma hugged me with tears in her eyes. whispering apologies and promises that things would be different. As we sat around the dinner table, the one I'd bought last Christmas, I looked at this family I'd helped build and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just love, but mutual respect. Not just generosity, but appreciation. Not just support, but partnership. David raised his glass of water. Wine was no longer in the budget, he explained with a rueful grin, and made a toast. It was a small gesture, but meaningful. Thompson's Diner had been our Saturday morning tradition when David was in elementary school. Just father and son, sharing pancakes and conversation before heading home to help Sarah with yard work or household projects. The fact that he'd remembered, that he'd made the effort, suggested this conversation might be different from our recent interactions. We sat across from each other in my small living room, 2 cups of familiar coffee between us like a bridge across months of hurt and misunderstanding. Dad, I owe you an apology. A big one. I nodded but didn't respond immediately. I'd learned the value of silence, of letting important words settle before reacting. I've been thinking about this situation for weeks now, David continued. Not just the tax bill, but everything. The way I've treated you, the way I've taken your help for granted, the way I've been erasing you from our success story. He opened the folder he'd brought and pulled out several printed pages. I recognized them immediately, screenshots of his social media posts, the ones I'd discovered weeks ago, that had crystallized my understanding of how completely he'd rewritten our family's financial reality. I printed these out so I could see them clearly, really look at what I'd been saying. His voice was quiet, ashamed. Dad, reading these now, I sound like an ass. A complete ass who was taking credit for accomplishments that were built on your sacrifices. David, no, let me finish, please. I need to say this. I settled back in my chair, watching my son struggle with words that clearly didn't come easily. The property tax bill scared the hell out of me, not just because of the money, though $1,050 was more than we had available, but because it made me realize how much I didn't know about our own life, our own house, our own finances. He pulled out another sheet of paper, this one covered with handwritten numbers and calculations. I spent 3 days going through every document related to our house, the mortgage papers, the insurance policies, the maintenance records. Dad, you've contributed over $95,000 to our household in 3 years. $95,000, and I've been telling people we did it all ourselves. The number hung in the air between us. I'd calculated the same figure weeks ago, but hearing David say it aloud carried different weight. It meant he'd done the math, faced the reality, acknowledged the scope of my investment in his independence. I called Jim Morrison too, David continued. Asked him to explain the property ownership situation. Dad, I didn't know. I honestly didn't know that your name was still on everything, that you were still carrying all the legal and financial responsibility while I got to play house with your property. Son, I never meant for you to feel deceived, but I was deceiving everyone else, wasn't I? Including myself. Emma and I have been living this fantasy where we were successful young homeowners who'd made it on our own. Meanwhile, you were quietly handling all the hard parts, all the expensive parts, all the parts that would have made our independence impossible. David leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. The last 2 weeks have been the hardest of our marriage, not just because of the money stress, but because Emma and I had to confront how artificial our comfortable life really was. We've been living beyond our means for years, subsidized by your generosity and protected from consequences by your safety net. And now we're learning what our actual means are. Emma found a part-time job at the elementary school. I've taken on freelance work that I'd been turning down because I thought we didn't need the extra income. We've cut our budget by almost $800 a month, eliminating expenses we thought were necessities but turned out to be luxuries we couldn't really afford. He showed me another sheet of paper, a detailed household budget that looked nothing like the casual financial management they'd practiced before. We can handle the property taxes going forward, he said. It'll be tight, but we can do it. More importantly, we want to do it. We want to actually earn the independence we've been claiming to have. I studied my son's face, seeing something I hadn't seen in years. Not just maturity, but humility. The kind that comes from facing hard truths about yourself and deciding to change rather than make excuses. David, I need you to understand something. The property taxes weren't punishment for Easter dinner. They were a consequence of you wanting independence while still depending on my support. I couldn't keep subsidizing a life where I wasn't welcome. I know that now. And Dad, about Easter... He paused, seeming to gather himself. That was Emma's sister's influence more than our own thinking. She'd been telling Emma that we needed to establish boundaries with family, that too much involvement from parents was unhealthy for marriages, and you agreed with her. I thought I did. I thought setting boundaries meant pushing you away. I didn't understand the difference between healthy independence and hurtful exclusion. David reached into his folder one more time and pulled out what looked like a greeting card. The kids made this for you, he said, handing it over. They've been asking about Grandpa Tom constantly. They don't understand why you haven't been coming over, why you weren't at Easter, why their bedtime story reader disappeared. I opened the card with trembling hands. It was construction paper covered with crayon drawings, stick figures labeled Grandpa, Tommy, and Lucy playing in what appeared to be a backyard. Lucy's contribution was mostly scribbles, but Tommy had written "We miss you" in careful kindergarten letters. The simple honesty of it broke something loose in my chest that I'd been holding tight for months. David, I miss them too. I miss all of you. But I couldn't keep being treated like a convenience rather than family. You're not a convenience, Dad. You're the reason we have any of this. The house, the stability, the opportunities we've been able to give the kids. Emma and I talked about this for hours. Without your support, we'd probably still be in that cramped apartment, struggling to save for a down payment, worrying about every unexpected expense. And that would have been okay too. Many young families start that way. But we didn't have to, because you gave us a different start, a better start. And instead of being grateful, instead of acknowledging what you've done for us, we got comfortable and entitled and started believing our own story about self-made success. David set down his coffee cup and looked directly at me for the first time since arriving. Dad, I'm asking for another chance. Not for more money, not for more help with bills. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild our relationship on honest ground, where I acknowledge what you've contributed, where I treat you like the father and grandfather you are, where I earn your respect instead of just expecting it. I studied my son's face, seeing echoes of the little boy who used to come to me with problems and trust that Dad could fix anything. But this wasn't a little boy asking for help anymore. This was a man taking responsibility for his mistakes and asking for forgiveness. What does that look like practically? I asked. It looks like Sunday dinners where you're always welcome. It looks like me calling you to talk, not just when I need something. It looks like the kids having their grandfather in their lives regularly, not just during emergencies. He paused, then added with a slight smile, and it looks like us paying our own property taxes while still making room for your involvement in our family. I thought about the past few months, the hurt, the anger, the satisfaction of teaching David an expensive lesson. I thought about Easter Sunday spent alone, about watching my grandchildren play in a backyard where I was no longer welcome, but I also thought about the man sitting across from me now, humbled and honest, asking for another chance to get it right. Sunday dinners sound good, I said finally, but I have one condition. David nodded eagerly. Anything. No more social media posts about being If you're going to share your success story, share the whole story, including the parts where family helped make it possible. For the first time in our conversation, David smiled. Really smiled. Deal, Dad. Though I should warn you, my next post is going to be pretty embarrassing for me. Something about learning humility from property tax bills and rediscovering what family really means. I smiled back, feeling lighter than I had in months. Your grandmother Sarah used to say that the most important lessons are usually the most expensive ones. Sounds like you paid full price for this education. Worth every penny, David said, even if it took me longer than it should have to appreciate what I was learning. That afternoon, I drove to David's house for the first time in months, not to sneak a glimpse from across the street, but to have dinner with my family. Tommy launched himself at me the moment I walked through the door, chattering excitedly about school and friends and everything I'd missed. Luce, now walking confidently, toddled over with arms raised, demanding to be picked up by Grandpa Tom. Emma hugged me with tears in her eyes, whispering apologies and promises that things would be different. As we sat around the dinner table, the one I'd bought last Christmas, I looked at this family I'd helped build and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just love, but mutual respect. Not just generosity, but appreciation. Not just support, but partnership. David raised his glass of water. Wine was no longer in the budget, he explained with a rueful grin, and made a toast. To Dad, who taught us the difference between independence and ingratitude, and to second chances we probably didn't deserve, but definitely needed. I raised my own glass, looking around at faces that reflected genuine affection rather than obligation. To family, I said simply, the real kind, built on honesty and respect. The property tax lesson had cost David over $1,000 and weeks of financial stress, But sitting there with my grandchildren on my lap, my son acknowledging my contributions, and my daughter-in-law treating me like family instead of an inconvenience, I realized the education had been worth every penny, for both of us. Outside, the sun was setting behind the house that was still technically mine but felt like ours again. David's independence was real now, earned through sacrifice and responsibility rather than subsidized by someone else's generosity, and my place in their lives was secure again, based on love and respect rather than financial dependency. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, but when they're truly learned, they change everything. As Tommy pulled me toward the backyard to see the improvements they'd made to the garden, I realized I'd gotten exactly what I'd wanted from this whole difficult experience. Not revenge, not even justice, but something simpler and more valuable. I'd gotten my family back, and this time, we all understood what that really meant.